The state of Alabama has ruled that frozen embryos are now people. State Supreme Court recently ruled that embryos created during in vitro fertilization are now considered to be extrauterine children and are legally protected like any other child that has been born, except, of course, for the fact that they're embryos, they are not born. But apparently it doesn't matter. The court has made this decision based on the Bible, because of course. Now the case, known as LePage v. Mobile Infirmary Clinic, rested upon an argument by several intended parents that their embryonic children had been victims of wrongful death. Now, an intruder had broken into an IVF clinic, dropping trays containing some of the embryos and ultimately destroying them. In a 7-2 decision, Alabama's highest court ruled that the clinic had been negligent, allowing the parents to proceed with a wrongful death lawsuit. Now look, when it comes to the people involved who had the embryos, who lost their embryos, I feel for them. IVF is an expensive process, and it's again, for people who have had no luck conceiving children on their own, they definitely want to be parents. I totally understand that. If something terrible happened, that wasn't their fault, they lost the embryos, that sucks. But in doing so, in doing this lawsuit, they actually opened up in vitro fertilization being banned in the state of Alabama, and that's not cool. So this is according to a report by Trevor Hughes, writing in USA Today. He said, Alabama's ruling raises questions about what happens to those unused embryos in storage, whether authorities could order them to be implanted in unwilling parents or bring child abuse charges, and what happens if a doctor implants embryos that failed to develop. So that's the scope of this ruling. Again, when you rule an embryo a human life, the same as a living, breathing child, those are the questions that will come up. I doubt that this is what the people suing intended to happen, okay? But just because they had a bad experience now, everyone who has fertility issues and seeks IVF treatment in Alabama is now going to suffer as a result. This is what happens. And now the court ruled that it is the public policy of the state to recognize and support the sanctity of unborn life and the rights of unborn children, including the right to life, referring to the Alabama Constitution's Sanctity of Life Amendment, which was ratified back in 2018. Here, the text of the Wrongful Death of a Minor Act is sweeping and unqualified, wrote Alabama Supreme Court Associate Justice Jay Mitchell in the majority's opinion. It applies to all children, born and unborn, without limitation. So there are no limits, right? Now, that's problematic. Does that mean any fertilized egg is effectively a human being? What if you miscarry then? Are you then liable for manslaughter, murder, negligent homicide? What? That's what this leads to. Now, I mentioned in the opening that this decision had a lot of biblical quotes in it. This one came from Jeremiah 1:5. Before I formed you in the womb, I knew you. Before you were born, I sanctified you. That was in this ruling, with the judge adding, we believe that each human being from the moment of conception is made in the image of God, created by him to reflect his likeness. Now, you also have Alabama Chief Justice Tom Parker writing in an opinion attached to the ruling. In summary, the theologically based view of the sanctity of life adopted by the people of Alabama encompasses the following. Number one, God made every person in his image. Number two, each person therefore has value that far exceeds the ability of human beings to calculate. And three, human life cannot be wrongfully destroyed without incurring the wrath of a holy God who views the destruction of his image as an affront to himself. Now, Parker, it's important to note, he is obviously a Republican and a longtime abortion opponent, aligned with Focus on the Family and closely allied with Roy Moore. Remember Roy Moore, who was like harassing 14-year-old girls at the mall, trying to get them into his car? Yeah, that Roy Moore. Yeah. Nice friends that you have, Mr. Parker. Now, there's a reason, of course, that people like this have ended up in the Alabama Supreme Court. Judges are elected in partisan elections for 6-year terms. Ah, that makes sense. Of course, Alabama is going to have a court that uses Bible quotes in their decisions. Now, here's the thing, though. The Bible is not the law of the land. The Constitution is, or at least it should be. These personhood bills should be considered a violation of the 14th Amendment, which states that no state shall deprive any person of life, liberty, or property without due process, nor deny any person within this jurisdiction the equal protection of laws. Well, when you think about it, what property do we all have? Our own bodies. Okay? In this case, a woman's body is her property. She owns her own body. She owns herself. Not the state, not the federal government, not the local church. The woman, that she owns her body. And so the state trying to come in and regulate that, and then for a fetus, an embryo that is not viable, that cannot exist outside the body, that is, again, a violation of her own property, her ownership of her own body. But, apparently, no, you don't own your own body if you live in Alabama, if you're a woman. Okay, well, good to know. Well, who does own it? Right-wing politicians and your pastor and the Bible, apparently. Now, getting back to how this affects the IVF community, the response here is, well, not encouraging. In fact, Barbara Kalura, CEO of Resolve, the National Infertility Association, said this is exactly what we've been fearful of and worried about where it was heading. We're extremely concerned that this is now going to happen in other states. Kalura said the decision will probably halt most IVF work in Alabama because doctors are now afraid that mishandling an embryo or even a miscarriage could open them up to being charged with homicide. Homicide! Now, IVF is responsible for nearly 100,000 babies born every year, according to the CDC. And typically, embryos have been treated as private property that donors could implant, give away, or have destroyed without consequence. But now, in Alabama, things are different. Okay? Things have changed. No longer are they considered your property. They are considered fully formed human beings with the rights that, again, fully formed human beings that have been born have. I mean, I don't know if anybody else sees a problem with this. You should. You should. That now what is essentially a frozen, popsicle is now considered a fully formed human being in the state. That if you mishandle, if you drop, if something happens, now you can be charged with murder. Murder over what is a bunch of cells. So, I mean, this is what's going on. And unfortunately, this decision could mean that it could spread to other states and not only destroy a method that people have been using, that have been desperate to have children of their own and have been unable to use, can no longer use, as well as, of course, enshrining more, ownership of women in the state by the state.